call myself a storyteller for health. As an individual who's been involved in research for the past 8 years, it was something that was a little bit difficult for me to come into. It was a structure that was built on very Western ideas of who Native people were and what health interventions were going to reach them the best. It was a struggle for me to find my place in that institution because I really felt who I wasn't fitting in there. And an uncle of mine, 3 months after starting working for the university, told me a story that really shaped who I am and what I've done within the research world. He told me this story of him as a little boy. He had been given some kind of toy. He had no idea what it was, a little sack. And in this little sack were these little glass, shiny, round things. He didn't know what they were. And he played with that little sack and he tossed it in the air and he threw it around and made these cool little noises as those little round things kind of bumped into each other. So a couple days after he got that toy from some missionaries who had come to his village, his mom had sent him to go get firewood. He lived in very rural Alaska. And as he walked to the stream where he was supposed to be getting his firewood, with his feet crunching on that white, crunchy snow, he walked across the stream, and in my village, the stream is still running at 30 below zero because it's coming from a glacier. It's just ice cold. And he stood over that stream and he dropped these little round things from this little sack that he'd had, and he dropped them into the water one by one. And he said they made the most beautiful sound, just this little ping, ping. And at the end, he looked and all he had left was this little sack in his hand. All of the little round glass things were now at the bottom of the creek, and because it was so cold when he dropped them, it barely made the tiniest of a ripple. And so he walked back home. So other than being the best story about how my uncle lost his marbles, it really illustrates the point of individuals bringing interventions, research studies into our communities with no knowledge of who the community is. And so instead of these interventions would have such strong promise, marbles are a great game to play. But if you don't know how to play the game, and if that game isn't applicable to who you are or where you're located, all you get is a tiny little sound and maybe the smallest ripple. And that's where I saw myself and then the strengths of other Indigenous people working in research to be coming in to change that story, to look at how do we engage individuals, tribal communities, urban Indian communities into research that truly serves their need. And what that means is we go in with an open heart and we go in with humility and compassion and understanding that we don't know what that community needs, they do. And the only way that research and health interventions are going to have the strength to actually make community change, we have to start knowing, understanding, and engaging people in the stories of their community, of how these interventions can serve them the best. Unfortunately, in our communities, American Indians and Alaska Natives experience morbidity and mortality from diseases that we're also familiar with: diabetes, heart disease, cancer. Instead of we're seeing these numbers decrease, we're actually seeing them widen. And even that, our incidence of these is higher than the general population. Our research and the way that we operate has to change. We have to be thinking about the research and the data as part of the stories that have been passed down to us from generation to generation. Who are we and where are we in telling that story, in shaping the landscape of who Native people are going to be in those future generations? How do we share that story? How do we build evidence for these evidence-based practices that actually have our evidence in them? It is so important for us to be not only part of the research world like myself, involved in and working for and directing a university program, but also as communities engaged in the research world where we are directing how the research is conducted in our land, ensuring that the topics that are being done are of benefit to our community or to the larger Native community across the country. How do we do that? It's really standing side by side with other researchers, with other communities, with each other, hand in hand, instead of competing against each other for the limited funds that the federal government puts forth for both research and for health interventions. And I know this is all kind of pie in the sky, wish world kind of thinking, but we have to think that way. We have to change the narrative of what health is, how we define, how the general United States and most of the world defines a healthy individual. It's based off of a middle-class white man. I want to have the health of a Pawnee Athabascan woman who is a mother, a daughter, a granddaughter, a community member. That is the health I want to see, and that is the health that I want to build for my community. And that makes us have to redefine what equity is, how we're going to reach health equity, and how we need to define health for our communities. And that is a community level conversation, that is a state conversation, that's a national conversation for us to have. And research. The ability to use those Western systems, but base it in indigenous knowledge and indigenous strengths and indigenous methodologies is the way that we're going to change and shift this narrative. And again, it has to have indigenous native people as part of that conversation. So at the end of the day, who do I want to be? I want to be that mother, that daughter, that wife, that granddaughter. I want to be that community member. And I want to change the narrative of health by telling the stories of our communities that show resilience, humility, love, compassion, and most of all, hope. Hope for the future. Because we're going to change this story. And we're going to pass down those stories to the next generations to build that stronger health for community. I just want to tell a story.